Hello, everyone, and welcome again this week to the Flint Community Webinar, your community resource every Friday at noon. We've got a fantastic lineup for you today. I'm so excited to introduce our experts who are going to be talking to us a little bit about protective factors to strengthen families. And so there we've got Kristen Young and Jennifer Giroux here to talk to us from the Flint Odyssey House, and they are wonderful partners and have talked to us many times in the past. We've also got our friends from Extension. We've got Darian Wilkerson here to talk to us about school violence prevention. So we've got a lot of great expertise and timely expertise. We're going to get started. All right. Thank you so much, Kristen and Jennifer, for being here. And I really apologize if I got your last name wrong. So feel free to correct me on that pronunciation, Jennifer.
No, you actually got it completely correct. Thank you. And thank you for asking us to be here.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about some of the work you've been doing.
So we are currently doing a lot of work around prevention. Sorry, just a moment. I'm going to get my slides up.
Absolutely.
Around prevention with families, parents, fathers, focusing on fatherhood programming, and reducing the barriers that our families are facing in the community to overcoming the social determinants of health. But I'll let Kristen, because this is actually her slide. I'm going to let her actually talk more on this, and I'm going to be quiet for a moment.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Jennifer.
So as Jennifer was stating, is that Odyssey House is traditionally come into the community as a substance use disorder provider, and building a program that really engages a holistic approach and specifically looks at family-centered care. We started branching out into different areas. Once we brought in children from newborn to age 18, a whole other list of factors and needs showed up as part of that process. And so that expanded our prevention. And then also brought us into where we started really looking at the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework. First by accident. For decades, there was a program or a specific intervention called the Strengthening Families Program. And so when we started seeing the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework, that SPF, SFP, SFF kind of thing was very confusing. You know how social work and behavioral health and acronyms can really trip people up. And so we were introduced to the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework by accident. And then really realized that it was sort of this essential ingredient in so many of the programs and so many of the specific interventions and evidence-based interventions that we had found that it really worked and really engaged. And because it really does take a look at programs across those social determinants of health and looking at the fact that you know, from a psychological point of view, we want to focus on individuals, but we really need to solve problems in broader context. Specifically looking at community level interventions and looking at ways that we can support families, multiple families, but also while we might identify an individual, substance use isn't an individual problem. It's a family, a systemic, a community problem. And so this is why we started focusing more and more and more on ways in which we could sort of broaden our lens, broaden our view. And that's where we came into the Protective Factors framework. Jennifer became a trainer through the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. In Michigan, it's called Children's Trust Michigan. And so we were funded for our 24/7 Dads program through that. And then that also brought in the opportunity for her to become a trainer in the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework. And that's what we wanted to share, is we wanted to share that we do have a Flint grown trainer in this framework that is available to our community, and that we will be able to extend that out. And so this is one of the reasons why we wanted to present this, is so that everybody knew they had that opportunity, intentionally and not by accident, how we found it.
Well said, Kristen. So I just found the framework of this training. I have been utilizing it in my own parenting, my own community, educating some of our staff on the framework. And I just love how all of the pieces of it are fitting together with what we're already doing. And it's not an extra burden on what we need to do. It actually lessens the burden. But the overall framework has 3 goals, and it's to strengthen our families to provide optimal child development and to reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. The whole idea behind it is do mandated supporting so we don't have to do mandated reporting. And I think that's a lot of our goals. Nobody really likes to have to report families that we're working with when we might have some way to better support them. So looking at this and the characteristics, I'm going to hand it back over to Kristen. She's going to talk about the characteristics around the framework and give you a little bit more insight into this.
Sorry about that. One of the things that we again, I mentioned earlier is that looking for something that was not an all size fits system, but one that really took a broad lens and looking at the idea of what can we do that would benefit all families, and what kind of things that we could look at. So as we were looking through our individual programs, and we were looking at the window, so to speak, at the community, what are some of the ways that we can look at ways that we can build family strengths and promote better outcomes? We all have programs that have different outcomes, and we wanted to have something that looks at that fits around a variety, and ways in which we could coordinate care better along a language that was shared amongst all the providers that we were working with. And then also looking at the idea that we can view this in very small parts, but also in broader parts, and then looking at the way in which this framework really does fit and really does center some of the other specific programmatic interventions that we have. And so this is one of the things that Strengthening Families framework does. It can be utilized in housing. It can be utilized in employment supports. Obviously, we use it in substance use disorder services and vocational training. And so we wanted to be able to do that. We also wanted to have something that was grounded in research and that gave that evidence base, so that as we're developing new programming in Flint, and we have some really great agencies that have some intellectual property that they're establishing and that they're demonstrating that works here in the community, it provides a common ground and a research practice and evidence base for a foundation in itself. And so that we really wanted to make sure that we had something that was grounded in that practice, and then it could help translate that through implementation. And so that we were able to take Flint stuff and stuff from our community and being able to take that out in broader ways and share that, rather than having other programs trying to shove into the Flint community where they might not fit.
Absolutely. And just to add on to that, traditionally, we always have separated our framework based on the person's risk factor, but this working for all families and providing protective factors kind of makes it like a universal type tool that we can utilize, rather than having to use a lot more thinking power around what protective factor do they need, because they all are beneficial. So with the Michigan initiative on ACEs, we've heard a lot, and a lot of us probably already know a lot of information about adverse childhood effects and how that impacts development all the way through later adulthood. And we know that the more toxic the stress, the more impact and the worser, if that's a good word, I'm a little nervous, but I'm going to try to use some good words. We know the poorer outcomes that people have later in life with their health related to high ACE scores. So this framework actually buffers against the ACE scores and the ACE risk and prevents them from occurring in the first place. So kind of for an example, when the pandemic hit, if these protective factors are implemented and our families are aware of them, and I'm going to get to them, but I'm going to keep them a little mysterious for a moment because I want to keep your attention to wondering what the heck are these protective factors. But if our families have all 5 of these protective factors, being able to buffer against the stress that comes from the pandemic, that comes from any type of environmental stressors, community stressors, or even neighborhood stressors, it will better prepare our families to be able to deal with that later without as much of a negative impact on them and their functioning. So this framework uses a strengths perspective. It doesn't ignore that there's problems and that there's risks that are found. It looks at what are the strengths that these families have to overcome the risk that they're facing. So what strengths do they have to already pull themselves forward in a direction that they need to go without focusing mainly on the risk? And it looks at taking away from not just surviving, not just getting your tangible needs met, but moving to a direction of truly thriving. And I know that that's what our community is moving toward. That's what Flint's moving toward. We're moving from a direction of some serious things have happened, and now we're learning to survive all of those, but we're moving forward into thriving from all of this. And I think that this framework helps and fits perfectly with where we're at in our transition of healing in the city. So it has 3 common threads, and it's how the 5 protective factors teach and support families and workers that are working with families in the community. It also takes into effect or into consideration culture and how culture impacts who we are working with people, who people are working with us, who we are as individuals, who we are as a community. And each course also takes into consideration that parents are partners. Parents are partners in this work that we're doing, and they play a very, very critical role in the work that needs to be done. And this one is Kristen, this one's to you. This is our logic model behind it.
So as I had mentioned, we came into and we're introduced to the protective factors framework sort of by an acronym accident. I want to say that, but sometimes that's the best way that things come into us. And so then as we're working through our own cultural shift, one of the things that we were doing at Odyssey House is that being a parenting program or a family-centered program, part of that is that when we were looking things, everything was sort of focused on mom. The idea that most of the families that were identified as vulnerable were somehow single family, mother, head of household families. That's what everybody, all the posters, all the information you had, there was a very obvious dad was left out of everything. And so as we were needing to sort of look at our own culture of an organization, one of the things that dawned on us is that even from the admissions department, we did not have changing tables in the men's room. So it's like, bring your kids, don't change them. Only moms are allowed to do that. And so being able to really take a lens and a deep view through and look at how can we build parent partnerships? How can we develop a knowledge and understanding of what it's like to be a dad, maybe a single head of household father, maybe, bringing couples into a system where we always think, well, if it's a dual house or a dual parent household, everything's great, right? We only focused on single family households. And you saw that even in videos for the program interventions. And then as we came through and started bringing that down into the different programs, what are ways that we can have everyday actions that support families? Like I said, changing tables, these very simple things like the different concrete supports. And then changing some of the language that we were using around understanding that I'm not an expert on your children. I can give advice on generally how children of about 3 are supposed to act, which means they're supposed to challenge you, right? But I don't know your children and I don't know their experiences. The parents are the experts on those children. And like any other expert, one of the parts that demonstrates that you're a true expert is you know where to get support and you know where to go look up additional information. And so being able to have families that have the skills that they need and the supports that they need to be able to change their change their relationship with each other, change their relationships with their children, as we're changing our relationships with families. And so there are those protective factors that are identified here. Looking for the goal, and again, we're in the process of adapting this and changing this and expanding it out. It's one of the things to take it from our residential facility and look at way in our prevention programming, and then look at the way that we're doing that across all our recovery housing and our outpatient program and some of the things that we're doing in coordination with our partnership. But we really do want to look at the idea that optimal child development, we wanted to be able to make sure that we had those protective factors and that developmental assets were really strongly promoted. And then again, looking at the idea that if we have these different things in place, we're reducing the likelihood of child abuse and neglect and further trauma through family separations. And so that was one of the things that really brought that to our attention too, is that being able to heal the family really kind of means that we need, as long as it's safe, we really kind of need that family to be able to connect with each other rather than disengaging them into different pieces of the system.
There are 5 protective factors that are utilized in this framework. And the first one is parental resilience. So if we can teach parents how to manage stress, because we know parenting is stressful. I mean, if anybody in here is a parent, it's stressful. Even if you don't have barriers in your life, it's stressful. Being an aunt is probably stressful at times. Being a brother is probably stressful. So having resilience, I think it should just be community resilience, because truly it takes the whole community to raise one child. There's a lot of different sayings around that, and I won't give you all of my little sayings, but just developing that parental resilience, having parents being able to utilize certain skills with their children to decrease the reaction that the children receive from parents when stressors are present, whatever that stressor may be for the family. Social.
And I think I'm sorry. I wanted to bring that up too, is that one of the things too is that we talk to parents a lot about is that that you can, once you get infant down, once you've got, like, I've got an infant, I'm good at parenting this infant, they become toddlers. And so they shift up on you. And so being able to help also parents being able to understand that the role of parent is going to change every couple of years because your child's doing exactly what they're supposed to do, which means grow up. And so a lot of times when we talk about parenting resilience, we don't mean like all this stress. We just mean the fact that your child develops and changes and your skill set needs to change.
I feel like every time you start to figure it out, it's like, oh, just kidding, we're done. Like, those skills don't work anymore.
Right.
I remember telling somebody that one day, like, I just got some really good parenting skills and they don't work anymore.
Right. They turned 12. What do I do with them now? Right.
Hey, I'm an 8-year-old who turned 8 today, and everything is different just because she turned 8. So I couldn't agree more.
Right.
So social connections is another protective factor, and we all have somebody. So we all have somebody that we call when life gets difficult, when life gets challenging, but there are families that have nobody to call. So understanding the importance of your social connections and how important those are to you, and you being able to connect and share your frustrations or your celebrations, both, but having a positive connection to somebody who you truly feel supports you. And sometimes that is a community-based connection. Another one of the protective factors is knowledge of parenting and childhood development, which Kristen and all of us just kind of spoke on, but knowing that kids are going to change, that they're going to do things different, knowing what the milestones are that your kids should be reaching so that if they're not, they're getting the interventions necessary, rather than expected to do things that maybe they need a little extra supports with. I'm going to wrap them all together here in just a minute. Let me keep getting them up here. Concrete supports in times of need. So we see a lot of diaper pantries in the area. It's connecting families, and it might not be that you provide it, but we're all a team in the community. And like I said, it takes a community. So being able to connect your families with where they need the support. So being familiar with community supports and connecting those families to those community supports, rather than just seeing them in our office and saying, hey, how are you doing with my goals? And how's that going? And let's just focus there, but looking truly at what the family needs, what concrete supports are necessary.
I'm going to jump in on that one too. And just from a personal experience, and one of those days we just showed up for work one day, and pretty much universally across the board, a lot of our parents were challenged with finding formula. And we went through this, how hard it was to find formula one day. And so as you're talking to somebody as a mental health professional or as
You're cutting it on us, Kristen.
I thought it was me. I guess while Kristen comes back, the formula thing was a real thing, right? Like, there was a 3 to 6 month period where there was a formula shortage, and there were lots of community agencies that we were trying to promote and we were trying to connect people to. But the idea that you don't know how to feed your child and you don't have access to the resources to feed your child, and what that means in terms of all the other factors you've described, your resilience when you're feeling like your only job is to keep this kid fed and you don't know how to figure that out, and your connections and your ability to sort of, depend on your network, feels like it would be really complicated, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I think that we sometimes we don't think of, the need that we have as individuals to be able to have that list of potential concrete supports and recognize that across all the different areas that we're providing, and being able to have those connections to resources and being able to say like, hey, I can't solve that problem, but I know some people that specialize in that, and that's where we can go to.
And Kristen, it feels so important to have those concrete supports sort of ready made, because there's this additional layer of stress when you're trying to figure out what the resource is, right? I have a problem I need to solve and I don't know how to access a resource, or I don't know what the resources are. And part of what I hear you saying is having a concrete understanding of what your resources might be, or a social network that you can kind of tap into when these things happen, is one of those protective factors.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And just looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if your basic needs if you're struggling there, being able to rise above that is just most challenging. So making sure that we're assessing and supporting in that area. And the fifth protective factor is social and emotional competence of children. So providing environments where children can participate in activities with parents. At Odyssey House, we have family fun nights where parents and the child make a craft together and provide that social emotional development. The parents connecting and engaging, so we know that's impacting attachment and bonding, but it's also the child having that opportunity to grow and to develop socially and emotionally in that setting. So it's a really cool thing to see. I mean, I know a lot of other programs do special things like that also, but that is one of the protective factors. Kristen, do you want to say something?
No, but I did want to mention the fact that like with those kind of those family fun nights, and we're seeing it more and more in the community, especially now that we're kind of opening things back up, is that there are a lot more family activities and a lot more ways that we can bring people together and being able to celebrate that. But also being able to form, allowing children to form secure relationships in varying different places so that they have that ability to practice social skills. We got very pulled in, I guess you could say, during the 2001 and 2. And so everything was really was going on in your living room rather than utilizing some of the other community spaces to be able to teach that social competence. And whether or not that's school, church, the park, a lot of other places, and that we can demonstrate it's okay to be frustrated and angry. This is how a variety of different people do that. And so that we can have that exposure, and we need to do that from the community context.
I feel like this is so important for parents, because I'm just going to put myself out there. I am terrible at playing, right? Like, I'm like, how do you play, right? I don't know necessarily how to do it. And these nights, right, give you an opportunity to sort of have a ready-made activity to engage with your kid with. I am much better if someone's like, okay, now we're going to paint a giraffe. I'm like, okay, cool, paint a giraffe, right? But like, imaginative play, I'm not great at it. So there's this place where you're kind of developing this resource for parents to engage with their kids in a way that sort of takes some of the thought out of it. So that's kind of cool too.
Right. And for the family fun nights, one of the things we do is we have Sherry, who that leads this. She is one of those craft gurus who can just like walk through anywhere and make something terribly cute. And then she puts these packs together and drops them off on the porch. So mom doesn't have to or dad, nobody has to figure out how to be creative with pipe cleaners. Like, she'll figure that out for you and then walk you through it, and then also be there to support. So when you do pull out the glitter and the glue, can help talk mom off the ledge when she realizes there's glitter and glue, right?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, right? And so being able to say, hey, this is how you play, and this is some of the ways that you can relax into it and make this a positive relationship with your child rather than a panicked relationship with your child and really restrictive. And so those are the kind of things that are part of that social emotional competence too, that it's okay to be fun, to learn and have fun at the same time is the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Thanks.
I think these protective factors are amazing. This whole curriculum and framework is amazing. There's a question in the chat about how long, what type of staff would benefit from this training, the length and the cost. Well, the cost hasn't been calculated yet. It's invaluable, but it's for the community also. The length of it, ideally, there are 5 protective factors. You ideally want to spend 2 hours on each protective factor. And there's also an intro course. It can be modified to fit the need, because the idea is to get this out there, to start utilizing this framework in every capacity that we can. It's developed to fit anywhere. It's just kind of a universal framework that we use to add in what we're already doing. If that makes sense. If not, please feel free to pop more clarity.
And so one of the things I wanted to add for that is that right now, Odyssey House has funding they can draw to make the training free to their community members or their community partners. And that's for the next year. And so between October 1st and September 30th this coming year, we have funding to be able to support that. It would probably be it's about 10 hours of training, right, Jennifer?
Yeah. Yep. I would say it's about 10 hours of training.
Right.
There's a lot of interaction. I mean, there's a lot of interaction. It could be done over Zoom or in person. It'd be really cool to do it in person. But there's a lot of interaction throughout the training with the participants.
So I was going to say, if you're interested in doing that, and Jennifer is the trainer, you can contact us and we'll work out what works for you and your staff, and being able to figure out, we do have the ability to pay for our staff, and to come and do the training. The one thing that we don't have the capacity to do is provide food during those 2 hours. So kind of like sharing some space and cost, and we could just work out what you would need to be able to do to have that brought into your agency.
There's so much I want to say, because we just don't have enough time. So I'm really struggling to push it all together, but we're going to do it. We're going to do this. So the Strengthening Families Protective Factor Framework buffers and prevents against the adverse childhood experiences. It works in hand with the PACEs, the positive adverse childhood experiences, and also with HOPE, healthy outcomes for positive experiences. And a lot of us have heard those different types of frameworks discussed in the community lately, especially in the last year, I think. So it buffers right along with the other strength-based interventions that we're using. And maybe even you could consider it kind of the central hub of the concepts related to the other frameworks. So the idea is to create a community with cultural safety. So moving from cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, cultural humility to a community where we can have cultural safety. And I just love this definition. I'm going to read it. I know most of you can read it for yourselves, but I want to hear myself say it again. It's an environment that is spiritually, socially, emotionally, and physically safe for people. A space where there's no denial of their identity, of who they are and what they need. It's about shared respect, shared meaning, shared knowledge, and experience of learning together. And when I went through this training with 20 other individuals from Michigan, I experienced an environment like that. We created that. When we went through the framework training to train trainers, we created that environment throughout this framework process. And I want to say it was just so therapeutic and so I came to Chris and I'm like, we got to use this ASAP. We've got to get this out there. Everybody needs to know this information. It's amazing. And this goes back to you, Kristen, to wrap us up.
So like we had kind of alluded to, there are 7 courses. There are 2 hours, right, to be able to do the training, to have that implemented. That goes over the 5 protective factors. We're talking, I said 10, we're talking more closer to 14 hours is what you would have to have set aside. We do have the funding to be able to provide it to our community partners for the next year. And again, anybody working with families, anybody working with individuals that has a family. And I think one of the things to be able to look at is those spaces that you don't normally think that you would have family services or family level interventions. It's a good way to start looking at how could you rethink some of the ways that you can engage family support, but also broaden the lens so that you're taking family into consideration when you're doing this. Specifically, like I mentioned, formula. How are you going to focus on this intervention in this task when the parent's brain is on, I'm almost out of formula and I don't know where to go and what to do. And so being able to look at how we could do that. And again, that having this grounded in research and practice helps sort of pull that together, so that we can have a theoretical orientation. So when somebody starts talking about, well, what's the evidence-based practice that you're basing these things on? It does have its own. And by all means, check out the Children's Trust Alliance, but also contacting either Jennifer or myself to being able to look at ways that we can set up that training. And then we can either come into your organization, or if we have enough organizations share an interest, we can look at setting that up in some kind of mutual space so we can bring that to you.
I wanted to ask a little bit about who you've already worked with and like how that's gone so far. Obviously it's gone well, but like what types of teams you've engaged with already?
As it relates to this training?
Yeah, as relates to the training, I'm sorry.
Our team, the Enhanced Parenting Project team. So our parent advocates, we've had 3 parent advocates that have sat in. We've done once a month for an hour. It's going to take us a while to get through it at that rate, but that's where we've been with it at this point.
Fantastic.
And one of the things I wanted to mention too is that, again, we're coming into this framework from like a residential, so a safe space, very organized. It was very easy to bring this framework into residential substance use treatment. When we started looking at it from an outpatient provider point of view, where it's always been more of a medical model, here's the person and here's their problem. Taking that framework and bringing that in and starting looking through that broader view really did have to directly addresses some of that, I guess you could say the comfort zone and the comfort level and the culture of what sort of like private practice mental health services are, because we do have that orientation of an individual with an individual problem. And so it was one of the things that getting buy-in has been tricky, even within our own organization. One part of it is doing it, and then other parts, like, what are you doing over there? And so we understand that like being able to bring this in does have a cultural shift in the way that people have been doing that, and the lens has to change. And for a group of people that are promoting change in others, we know our workforce doesn't like to change. Like we know that we're good at other people doing it, but not ourselves. And so that's one of the things too, that helping do this, and we recognize it does need to be done over a period of time so that you can help make these small lasting steps rather than just flooding somebody and it's just going to dry up and go away.
Right.
3 months later.
It's sort of that longitudinal in medicine. It's almost that continuing medical education, right? It's that continuing to work on your skill set and build those skills. It is striking me that Darian's going to talk to us a little bit about school violence, and that we have sort of been in back to school season. And I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about some of the protective factors and where they show up for people as they're sending their kids back to school, and what some of those tools are that we should be thinking about, and where your resources dovetail with back to school.
I think that all of the protective factors could fit into that. So when you're thinking about parental resilience, thinking about children pick up on our anxiety. So if I'm sending my daughter to school and she's a senior this year and I'm anxious about what might happen at school today, and I'm communicating that to her, that's going to create more anxiety also in her. Although I want her to be aware, I want her to feel safe. So having those support systems that I can go to, and I've gone to Kristen before and said, I work remotely right beside my daughter's high school. When there's a siren, I freak out. Is that school violence going on, or is that somebody having a seizure? So, having somebody other than our children to share, so supports to share those kinds of thoughts for parents, but also providing children support in times of need, because these are different times. So having that person in the school that kids can go to, that safe person. My daughter's school has built, coming back from the pandemic, and I think it's also helping to feel safe in the school community in general. They have identified one staff member that's your go-to staff member for anything. They will help you study for an exam. They will talk to you about something that happened that night. And like the janitors, there's different people in the school that are there to support them in their times of need. And it can be concrete supports. Maybe they need a shirt out of the office because they spilt something on theirs, whatever it may need, they're their support person. And have parents having knowledge of their children, of red flags for mental health symptoms, of red flags that they're fearful or struggling because of maybe bullying or whatever violence they may be experiencing at school. There's a lot of pressure at school. And I think that if parents have an understanding of that, if they have an understanding of how social media impacts all of that, and just have understanding of childhood development and what their children are going through. And then, developing social and emotional competence for children, talking to children about how to handle their friendships, even though they may seem petty and you may be tired when you get home from work or whatever you are doing all day. And your 16-year-old daughter wants to tell you about this drama at school. I've heard so many parents say, don't bring your drama home, leave it somewhere else. No, I want to know about your drama. I want to know how you handled it. Let's talk about how we could have done that differently. I want to develop you socially. So teaching parents that skill too. And I know that I'm running into other times, so I'm talking really fast.
No, don't talk fast. I think we have a couple more minutes. I really appreciate that context, because you said, don't bring your drama home. And there is this element of like parents who have been working all day, right? And it's almost the same with parents. Don't bring your drama home, right? Like, come to me with your cup, hopefully fully filled, resilient, etc., so that you can help me do your second job or your primary job, however you want to frame it, of helping me work through these things I'm not developmentally ready to work through, it sounds like.
Yeah, I've already been implementing all of these protective factors in my family. I believe in these factors, and I believe that they do protect families. And I want to implement them before I'm asking or challenging or teaching other people to even implement. I just was trained in July, so I'm freshly trained, and we have already started implementing, like I said, and it's just going great.
Fantastic. Any last words you want to leave our people with, the community with, around protective factors they need to think about, resources that you're able to provide? Any last thoughts?
Kristen, I'll let you do this one.
Other than the fact that, like I said, we had the opportunity for Jennifer to get trained. That training happened in July. It feels like a year ago, right? But July was actually only a couple of months ago. And then we do have this ability to be able to provide this training at very little cost to our community partners. And so we're not sure how that looks, because believe it or not, that was a couple of months ago that we had the opportunity, and we really haven't wrapped our heads around it yet. So we would even love feedback from the community to help guide us as to what that needs to look like, because we're not 100% sure. It was a last minute opportunity, and by all means help direct us in where to go with it. But we do want to make sure that we're sharing this across the community with all our partners. And that's the biggest thing I think that we want to make sure that it's, and when I say little or no cost, I mean, you pay for the coffee and we'll send Jennifer over.
I'm always down to pay for the coffee.
Okay.
Thank you so much to both of you and all the wonderful resources you provide.
Thank
All
you.
right. Darian, thank you so much. And this is a great lead in. We talked about how parents and how people can manage sort of school stress and the stress of going back to school, and sort of what students might be dealing with in school environments that might be really hard for parents to respond to. Can you talk to us a little bit about your work around violence prevention in schools?
Yeah, appreciate the transition, guys. But yeah, my name's Darian. I work for Michigan State Extension in the healthy living sector of it all. And so for us, I work within a team, and we are just in the community as much as possible. I'm an educator, so I'm in the communities when it comes to organizations or schools, high schools, elementary, middle schools, and we're offering wellness workshops, right? So we're just offering mindfulness, stress management, healthy relationship development workshops within the schools. And then we also offer trainings such as youth mental health first aid. So I'm one of the instructors for both youth mental health first aid. So you're teaching parents, educators, anyone who's an adult figure in a youth's life, just the signs and symptoms of mental health and how do you support. And there's an action plan with that too. And then there's also something called teen mental health first aid training, which is essentially the same platform, the same outline, but you're targeting the teens, and you're typically targeting roughly 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. And so those are the main powerhouses that we're doing right now in the community to try to support this.
That's fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about what some of these programs look like. So what does teen mental health first aid look like?
Yeah, so both youth and teen mental health first aid is a national training underneath the Council of Wellness. But for teen mental health first aid, you're going into the schools and you're roughly doing 8 sessions. So you're starting off with session 1, which is like an entry and welcoming They're getting set up within this platform website called Connect, and that's where they have access to all the curriculum and the PowerPoints and everything, right? And so each workshop you're building off of something, or each session you're building into something, and they're learning about the signs and symptoms of mental health. How do you support a peer, the influence of social media, things like that. And so they're kind of building into becoming like student leaders, if you will, right? So if there's something going on within their school or their peers, they can see that and they can do a warm handoff to a trusted adult.
So that
And that's-
sounds it
Go
kind of
ahead.
sounds like that trusted adult that Kristen and Jennifer were talking about in schools, that if you have an issue, you can kind of identify and talk to.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in front of you. You got a whole slide set that you're about to go into, so I'll let
No,
you run it.
I mean, no, you're good. I mean, it's good to kind of know, and this is, trainings that we offer for free for schools. And then also we offer this for community partners as well. Youth and teen mental health first aid is at a lower rate, so it should be able to be beneficial for the partners. But yeah, we just want that to be known that we do these kind of things in the community, and it kind of helps reduce or potentially reduce school violence. So, but yeah, targeting into like the PowerPoint, that's literally what this whole PowerPoint is going to be about. So it's a little bit about school violence, and as those who are dealing with youth, whatever setting you're in, school, community partnerships or community outlets, you just want to know like the risk factors and the protective factors and like what kind of roles we can play to kind of support the youth when it comes to that. So again, I all of us unfortunately kind of have an awareness of what that looks like, the definition of it. These are typically things are happening between the students, right? Sometimes it can be between the student and faculty or whatnot. But again, you're seeing this within physical violence, psychological violence, and unfortunately can roll into sexual violence as well. So kind of knowing kind of what presentations these can be beneficial for us to kind of get ahead of it and be aware. Thank you for that. So interesting result study here. I kind of found it. The University of Michigan, they are doing some research into this as well. I'm sure a lot of people are, right? This is unfortunately a rapid scenario that each year seems to be increasing with the reports and unfortunate scenarios or events that are happening in communities when it comes to school violence. But this in general is saying that the National Center for School Safety, which operates under the University of Michigan, is showing the number of tips or calls are getting reported roughly within the area when it comes to school violence. And if you can really look at this right here, there's 5 distinct categories. Number one seems like bullying is the number one indicator of what people are mentioning nowadays, right? This is taken back from last year's study, but of course, I'm sure that's so prevalent in schools or just, areas around us. And unfortunately, we're looking at suicide threats or behaviors are coming at number 2. Drugs, the influence of utilizing drugs is 3. Anxiety, stress, depression, and harassment is coming in at number 4, and it's threats in general number 5. So those are like the core categories that we're kind of seeing when it comes to school violence. And so that gives us an identity to kind of be mindful of when we're trying to support. And fortunately, this is starting to become more increasing. We're looking at 19% from the year prior, and this was a report done in 2022. So again, this is once again showing this is an important thing for us to be mindful in. So then again, I'm sure all of us are becoming more aware of risk factors, but again, it doesn't hurt to kind of look at a list once more. So we are trying to become more familiar when it comes to supporting our youth or children, right? We've heard a little bit of things earlier from the last PowerPoint, but again, we're looking at consistent bullying could be one that is like a risk factor for school violence in any shape or form, and then outward expression of violence. And unfortunately, we kind of view this as sometimes, well, the victim of bullying can be those who are in high risk. And while that's true, the alternative, the ones who are actually the perpetrators of bullying are lashing out in school and those things. The aggression and anger is coming from a secondary place, right? They're coming from a place that they're feeling unheard or something's happening in their home or whatnot, right? And so they're lashing out. So again, it's good to target those on the other side who are actually causing those scenarios at school. So if there's an outward expression of violence, we need to make sure to check in and see what's going on with that youth, right? And again, extreme mood or personality changes, that can be everyone at play when it comes to that. Teachers, parents, whatnot, be mindful, kind of familiarize yourself with the youth and how they typically present because of this extreme change is important to kind of know. Consistent social rejection, that's going to sting, right? We want to be accepted, want to be a part, especially adolescent development in particular. We want that. We want to have a sense of, community. And so if we're getting constantly rejected, that's going to fuel something. So just being mindful and kind of being mindful what's going on. Making plans to harm themselves or others. Again, fortunately, we don't always know or have awareness of that's going on. But if we hear about it, if it gets word to us, we have to take any kind of situation like that as a real threat, right? Even if they can say, I'm joking, that wasn't true, we still need to check in because that could be a mask for something else. And so again, bringing weapons to school or having access to firearms, so fortunately, those can be, risk factors. We have heard multiple scenarios in the past that just having that access or having those moments in the past when those things happen can increase that likelihood for school violence even more. So just being mindful of that as well is important. And again, there's additional ones on the other side of the slide. We have expressing or showing feelings of isolation, untreated mental health challenges, expressing hopelessness. These are additional things that, with just checking in constantly, we would have an awareness of that. And just trying to be mindful that if someone is feeling more down than normal with those extreme mood changes, we can try to act early rather than later. Flip to the next slide. Thank you. And then it goes to protective factors. So what do we do? What can we do as community partners, as teachers, parents, whatnot? And what can we do to kind of support our youth? First, when it comes to the school, right? If we're at a school setting, community setting that youth are coming to, like a youth center or after school place, creating a pro-social environment is like a key thing, right? Trying to have the benefit of others in the forefront. So just trying to encourage kindness, compassion, that kind of thing, vocalize that, use that as like a motivator when it comes to behaviors within those settings can really be beneficial because that can reduce bullying, that can reduce all those things that can really amplify those feelings. Strong communication between families and schools. We can only do so much, right? At the end of the day, they're going home. We don't know what's going on there. So again, maybe like we heard from the last presentation, having family nights, things like that, checking in with the families, creating at least a branch for them to connect with us can be beneficial. We can see what's going on. We can offer resources. So just trying to have strong communications with families is a really good thing. Community partnerships is another thing, right? That's when everyone else that are sitting in here today can come into play. So you're just trying to have community partnerships with businesses, police officers, mental health agencies, things like that, so we can offer a safe place for the youth if need be. Sometimes libraries or after school programs, can be a safe haven, if you will. So just kind of seeing what's out there so you can kind of offer that for students, and that can reduce that isolation or this fear of just being not heard or alone. Annual review for school safety procedures. Things happen day to day, and it's good for us to kind of be aware of that and to update those procedures if necessary. Always be on top of that kind of stuff because that's very beneficial. And then when we're going into frequent readiness for drills and trainings, unfortunately, I know I've heard, back in the day, they didn't have to worry about that stuff, right? But there's certain trainings that we can implement within schools now that can prepare them for violence in the school or bullying or whatnot. And that can just help them be more equipped when those occasions would unfortunately happen. Interesting research I found, incorporating school uniforms. This can be interesting. Doesn't have to be the case, but kind of read that incorporating school uniforms can be a way to kind of reduce comparisons, peer pressure, feeling kind of like you have to match or be like a peer. It kind of creates that neutral grounds with everybody, and that can be something of importance to incorporate. And again, you can offer potentially discounts or financial support for purchasing school uniforms, but that can be an area of importance as well. Focusing on hiring efforts. Interesting study I noticed is that the reason sometimes we don't see these things happening because we could be in a place that's understaffed and we have a high amount of students in each room, and we're just trying to get through the day. and we're not going to see everything. So because we're human, but kind of focusing on hiring efforts, so there's more bodies in there, can definitely be beneficial when it comes to just targeting and kind of seeing those differences of behaviors. And then we have positive relationships with a trusted adult. We heard that before, is very key, can be anybody. But having that one trusted adult they can lean towards is very beneficial. It can help having like that outlet, someone that they can lean in on. And then again, the last two on here is monitoring system. So that's just anyone that can just kind of freely roam the hallways, lunch areas, just like really crowded locations in the schools or just the building that you're in. That can be beneficial, just keeping a watching eye. It can just be a friendly like presence too. Sometimes students are not going to like that getting hawked or like kind of checked in on, but if it's a friendly presence, it's someone that's kind of dipping in and checking in on them, that can be beneficial. And especially when there's people who are coming in to the school or coming into a building, you want to make sure you're just doing your due diligence, ensuring that they're safe individuals and they're able to come into your building. And then there's, of course, educational programs that can be implemented within the schools too, or just community buildings or whatnot that we can do for the students. So we're getting into ongoing effort examples. Like I mentioned, I am one of the trainers for both youth and teen mental health first aid trainings. Again, if we take a more broad approach for teachers and students to be more mindful of mental health challenges or just awareness of, then maybe we can get ahead of this and we can try to get the warm handoff and the support they need in the moment so they don't feel so alone or they don't feel this accumulation of emotions to cause an act that can happen. Sometimes bringing in guest speakers can be beneficial. I'm sure there's definitely people out in the community who have either lived experience or those who are willing to come in could offer a different, vision or outlet when it comes to these kind of things, and they might be more drawn to those stories too. A buddy system can be beneficial. Certain schools might even have this in place, but if you have student leaders who are role models, maybe they can be connected to an individual at the school that it could be incoming freshmen or whoever, and that can kind of create that buddy system. And eventually they can kind of support you in the act of making sure that no one feels alone and they have someone, and they can help with that connection with a trusted adult as well. Dedicated weeks of kindness or mental health awareness. Certain schools are making that more of the forefront. So that pro-social environment, as we mentioned earlier, that can be a piece of that. That can be a way to instill that within your building or whatnot. I saw an interesting research study that says anonymous student tip lines can be important. I can see how students can take advantage, but I feel like that's just another thing to kind of offer that fair, like, hey, if you're going to take advantage of this, these are the consequences. But sometimes students aren't going to speak up in fear of a lot of things. I'm going to be a snitch, maybe I'm wrong. There's a lot of fear around it. So if there's an anonymous like tip line or something there within the schools or buildings, maybe that could be something that can remove that fear and they can actually let someone know what's going on. And lastly, programs for struggling youth. Typically, like we said, sometimes it can be the victims, oftentimes it can be those who are inflicting that on their peers. So if their people are getting suspended, maybe when they're coming back, there can be a program in place to kind of walk them back in gradually with the support of their families, and maybe getting them connected to resources, school counselors, whoever, that can kind of help them acclimate themselves back in and kind of figure out what went wrong. Like, what are some things that we can do to improve your experience here? Because school connectedness is a piece of it for a protective factor as well, right? And lastly, academically, having a decline in academics or struggling academically can cause a lot of emotions and isolation within the school. And so trying to have those kind of programs as well for youth who do struggle academically, that can definitely support that and definitely try to instill more of a holistic experience and more connectedness into the school. So those are definitely things to keep in mind. Not all of it has to be implemented, but there's things to kind of keep in our back pocket when we're trying to look at school violence as a whole and what we can do to support our youth.
Darian, I wondered, and really this is for all of our sort of experts in this area, you, Darian, Kristen, and Jennifer. Let's say a kid comes to you and is like, I'm being bullied, or you suspect a child is being bullied, there are all these resources, but what would you say are the first like 3 steps you would recommend someone do, right? Because there's all these resources, and you could call the school, and there's lots of layers. And if you were to suspect a child was being bullied, what would you say would be some good steps for someone in the community who's hearing about it, or a parent who's hearing about it, or a trusted person who's hearing about it?
I mean, I guess I'll go first. I mean, I feel like the first thing is definitely just checking in, following up on the rumors or your suspicions, because it's coming from a place that probably has a lot of, valid, truth to it. And so there's something called the bystander effect, where it's like, okay, eventually someone's going to get to them. I don't need to have my toes dipped into that. Well, not necessarily. So I would definitely say step 1, checking in. Step 2, validating them and really trying to really get to their level, because I would feel like trying to have a first person approach to it. Like, what's going on with you? What can I do to support you right now? I think a lot of times we go in kind of hot, kind of go in with a lot of assumptions without even meaning to. I feel like we've been there, but I really think checking in with our emotions and biases going into that, because we can downplay it. Oh, well, that's going on, and I've been there, and that wasn't that big of a deal. You'll be fine. It's like, well, maybe to them, they're not fine. So really just validating their experiences too. So I would just say, first off, just approaching them with openness and just trying to check our own biases would be like the first go-to. And if there is something, they'll be more comfortable sharing. But then also recognizing maybe you're not the right person to approach the youth. Maybe you don't have that rapport with them. So maybe you might have to lean in on your spouse, like, hey, you might need to check in on so-and-so, because maybe this is a topic they don't feel comfortable sharing with me. At least they're getting that support. So those are the things I would initially try.
Those are fantastic. Any other comments there?
One of the things I was really interested in one of the earlier slides was the idea of looking at sexual violence, but also the way in which sexualizing is a form of bullying. And so in recognizing some of the things that, instead of looking at a framework for, well, back in my day, in recognizing this isn't back in my day. My day was the 70s. And, so we need to being able to honor where they are at now in some of the ways in which you can't escape. Social media does not allow you to go home and escape in the way that they're able to be so intrusive now. And so really being able to sit down and like Darian said, check your biases and your own experience. This is their experience, not yours. And it's a very, very hard thing to do.
So I heard, oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
I was gonna say, I definitely agree with everything that's already been said, and recognizing that our children live in a different culture than many of us do on this screen in this webinar, and just truly listening to understand rather than to respond. And I know we're always wanting to respond. We're always wanting to do the next thing, and listening to understand. And then once we're understood, I think it's then working in partnership with our youth to do the next right thing together. Even if it's not a fun thing, even if the youth thinks they can't, but supporting them and doing that next right thing and taking that next right step, even if it's doing it with them hand in hand. I think sometimes we take too much from our youth by stepping in and doing it for them, and it may push them farther away from us in not coming to us because we're going to do it our way and not truly listen and hear the ways they want to do it. So that's all I wanted to say.
Listen to understand, check your bias, check in with your youth. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Really appreciate your expertise. I want to leave you all with a major announcement. The webinar is transitioning to a bit of a monthly occurrence. So instead of coming to you every week at noon, we're going to be coming to you virtually once a month at noon. And that's going to look a lot like us being on the webinar once a month, still bringing you that trusted expertise. But we're also going to be out in the community working to understand what you really need from us on the webinar, what you need to hear about. We're going to be engaging with our community. We're going to be engaging with our community partners. So we're really excited about this transition that's going to allow us to bring you really trusted information and continue to bring you the information you want to hear, you need to hear, and be connected to community. One of the things that's always really impressive to me is the extent to which community partners get to like learn about each other on the webinar, right? So share resources and learn about what other partners are doing. And we're really excited to sort of keep that up on the webinar by getting out into the community and hearing what you all have got to do. So we've got a few more weeks. Please join us on September 29th and October 13th. Next week's webinar will happen 9/29, and then the webinar will be on a monthly basis, the second Friday of every month. So join us next week, September 29th, and then October 13th. And you can catch all of our previous webinars on our YouTube channel, so don't hesitate to check in. Thank you so much to everyone for your time and attention. And remember, continuing education units for community health workers. And in the chat, if you're interested in youth mental health first aid or teen mental health first aid, shout out to Darian, shout out to Jennifer, shout out to Kristen. Thank you so much.